Hello students, welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Welcome to a session on economy this week, wherein we'll be taking some of the very important articles that have appeared in various business related newspapers and we'll be analyzing these particular articles. For this particular video, I've chosen the time period from 3rd of August to 9th of August 2020, and the articles that I've chosen are from Business Line, Hindu, Business Standard, Indian Express and Live Mint. Let's begin the discussion. The first two articles are basically on the banking sector. The first article is from Business Standard, which basically discusses one of the recommendations of RBI to government to reduce its stake in public sector bank. And the second article is related to the banking sector reforms, and I'll be discussing one of the very important committee recommendation under the second article. So first and foremost, understand this. Government of India owns at least 51% of the stake in the public sector banks. By the term public, it basically means that Government of India owns a majority of the shares or the stake in these particular banks. Hence, these are called as a public sector banks. Now, on one side, Government of India owns majority of the stake, and on the other hand, Government of India from one year to the next year keeps on divesting, or to be more precise, disinvesting the shares in order to generate certain revenues. And in this particular financial year, Government of India has set up a huge target for conducting disinvestment. Now, the Government of India can sell the shares of any of the entities which are owned by it, and one such set of entities is the public sector banks. Now, the recommendation of RBI is that Government of India should reduce its ownership in some of these particular public sector banks in the next 12 to 18 months. And by reducing its stake, by basically selling these particular shares in the market, Government of India will be generating huge amount of revenue. As per the proposal which has been given by Reserve Bank of India, if Government of India reduces its stake in these particular public sector banks, that is SBI, PNB, BOB, that is the Bank of Baroda, Union Bank, Canara Bank and Bank of India. So if Government of India reduces its stake in these particular 6 public sector banks to 51%, then Government of India shall be generating around 43,000 crore rupees. So Government of India will be generating huge amount of revenue, which is very, very important for it in the present situation. This is one of the articles. Now, why this is important? Understand this. Over a period of time, there have been various committees which have given a recommendation that Government of India should reduce its ownership stake in these particular public sector banks. Now, one such committee which gave a different mechanism, but in a way, it would be reducing the interference of the government in the functioning of the public sector banks, is the committee of PJ Nayak. Now, let me go to the second article. The second article basically discusses the need for the banking sector reforms. In recent times, RBI has announced that it will not be continuing with the moratorium, and in place of the moratorium, there will be a different mechanism which has been introduced. Now, this is a very good decision taken by RBI for a simple reason. A continued moratorium on the interest payment would be disastrous on these particular banks. As per RBI report itself, for the period of 6 months, during which the moratorium was in place, monthly, these particular banks, that is all the banks, were not able to collect 33,000 crore rupees. But again, understand this, moratorium is basically a postponement of the payment and not cancellation of the interest payment. That is in simple terms. Once the moratorium period is over, the banks will be collecting this particular amount. But for this particular 6 months, they were unable to collect around 2 lakh crore rupees in the form of interest. And this has put a lot of pressure in the banking sector. And once the moratorium period is over, there is a concern that the companies under the financial pressure might not be able to make the repayment to the banking sector. As a result of which, the non-performing assets, NPAs in the banking sector might suddenly spike. And not only this, there is also a concern that with this particular spike in the NPAs, the banks might be forced to make higher provisions for these particular NPAs. Even if these accounts do not become NPAs and there's a restructuring of these particular loans, it will also lead to higher provisioning of these particular banks. And higher provisioning basically means the banks will have to keep aside large amount of a capital in order to provide these particular restructuring of the loans or in order to take care of these particular non-performing assets. As per one estimates, because of these particular NPAs as well as the restructuring, the banking sector in India might require around 90,000 crore rupees worth of capital, which the government of India has to infuse into these particular banks. So government of India, which is already reeling under a lot of financial pressure, might be forced to infuse capital again in the banking sector. That is the second part of the article which is given here. Now, in combination of these particular articles or taking those articles together, let me give you one of the committee recommendations which I've already referred to. That is PJ Nayak Committee Report. This particular committee report will be quoted very often whenever there's a discussion of these particular banks, specifically focused on public sector banks. Now, please understand this. The government of India, equipped with various provisions under various acts, regulates the public sector banks. In addition to RBI also regulating these particular PSBs. Now, government of India will regulate the PSBs under Banking Companies Act of 1970, Banking Nationalization Act of 1980, SBI Act, so on and so forth. So government of India also has a very important regulatory role to play in terms of regulation of these particular PSBs. Over a period of time, various RBI governors have been asking for more autonomy or more powers to be given to it in terms of regulation of these particular PSBs. For example, one of the earlier RBI governors, Mr. Urjit Patel, basically stated that the regulation of the banking sector should be ownership neutral. That is, though government of India owns a majority of the stake in these particular PSBs, it should be RBI which should be given the major regulatory powers. For example, RBI doesn't have all the powers in terms of, let's say, merger of these particular PSBs. Since government of India owns at least 51%, or it is the majority owner of these particular banks, it is the government of India which holds all the cards in some of the situations such as mergers, appointment of people to the boards of these particular banks. Hence, over a period of time, various experts as well as the previous RBI governors have been arguing for more powers to be taken away from government of India and to be given to either one of the institution or to the Reserve Bank of India. Now, what are the recommendations of PJ Nayak committee in regards to these particular issues? First and foremost, the committee recommends that Government of India should amend the acts which will give them powers to regulate these particular banks. First and foremost, the committee recommends that the Government of India should repeal the Bank Nationalization Acts, the SBI Act. Since Government of India holds majority of the stake under these particular banks, these particular acts must be amended. And second, Government of India must set up a new company or a holding company that will be referred to as a bank investment company, and the ownership of these particular banks should be transferred from the Government of India into this particular bank investment company. In simple terms, BIC will be owning the shares of these particular public sector banks henceforth. And once the BIC is set up and the ownership is transferred from Government of India into the hands of the BIC, these particular banks will be referred to as a limited banks. And the BIC will be making decisions in terms of regulating these particular banks in addition to RBI. Not only this, in terms of appointments or in terms of some of the other very important functions, this particular committee also has given a recommendation. For example, it has recommended that for a temporary period, a new institution or an authority named Bank Board Bureau, BBB, must be established, and it should look into recommending the people for higher level positions in these particular public sector banks. And over a period of time, this particular function must be transferred into BIC, And the BIC over a period of time should transfer this particular power of appointments at, let's say, the board level positions to the respective banks themselves. So in simple terms, this particular committee has recommended that the ownership must be taken away from Government of India. Some of the very important functions which are in the hands of Government of India should be taken away and transferred or must be given to BIC and then to the public sector banks themselves. So these are some of the very important recommendations given by PJNI committee, and that is the gist related to the two articles which are given here. Now, based on this particular discussion, let me take up some of the questions. Which of the following are used by the government to regulate public sector banks? First, Banking Companies Acquisition and Transfer Undertakings Act of 1970. Yes. Bank Nationalization Act of 1980. Yes. State Bank of India Act of 1955. Yes. All the three are correct. Right option will be option D, 1, 2 and 3. Next, descriptive questions. Discuss PJNI committee recommendations, 250 words. Second, not although discussed in the present context, but this has been there in the current affairs, that is critically evaluation of the issue of a bank mergers in India. Very recently, Government of India has decided to merge various public sector banks, that is 10 public sector banks into 4. And Government of India stated that over a period of time, this number of public sector banks will be gradually reduced. So the idea of a bank merger will come into the discussion. You will have to provide a critical evaluation of this particular idea of a bank mergers in India. So this is related to the first two articles. The next article is related to MEIS benefits. First and foremost, what do you mean by MEIS? Earlier videos also we have discussed the concept of MEIS, but let me give you a very brief introduction to the idea of a MEIS. MEIS basically stands for Merchandise Exports from India Scheme. I repeat, MEIS stands for Merchandise Exports from India Scheme. This particular scheme was launched in the Foreign Trade Policy 2015-2020. Now here is a current affairs part. This particular foreign trade policy was supposed to end in 20, but Government of India has given an extension of 1 more year for this particular foreign trade policy. Now under this particular foreign trade policy, Government of India introduced two very important schemes to promote exports of goods, that is merchandise, as well as services, that is invisibles. The scheme that was introduced to promote the exports of merchandise was MEIS, Merchandise Exports from India Scheme, and the scheme that was introduced to promote service exports was SEIS, Service Exports from India Scheme. I'll be focused on the first one, that is the MEIS. MEIS was framed by taking into consideration or by merging earlier export incentive schemes. 5 of these particular export incentive schemes were merged to form this particular MEIS. Under this particular concept of MEIS, the exporters would be given certain incentives, and these particular incentives were given in the form of scrips. Now, what information has been provided in this particular article? This particular issue of a scrip in the form of incentives were decided arbitrarily. In certain goods, the scrip value, that is the incentive, were around 2%. In some of the cases, it was later increased to 5%. In case of some of these particular merchandises, it was as high as 20%. That is the first point. Second, the number of commodities or the items which were exported, which were considered under MEIS, was expanded over a period of time. As per this particular article, the total number of items which were covered under this particular scheme expanded from 4914, that is 4,914 items, to 8,015 items in the last 5 years. Third, the total expenditure incurred by the government in the form of incentives which were given under this particular scheme has kept on increasing at a very fast pace. For the financial year 19 and 20, the Government of India has incurred a total expenditure of around 45,000 crore rupees under this particular MEIS scheme. And this particular scheme is being discussed for a simple reason. The Minister of Finance says that on one side, the expenditure incurred because of the incentives are increasing, but the exports from India to the rest of the world, that is merchandise exports from India to the rest of the world, have remained stagnant. That is a precise reason. Very recently, the Minister of Finance has stated that the total incentives under this particular scheme for this particular fiscal will be capped at 9,000 crore rupees only. That is, it is saying that for this particular fiscal, we are going to allocate incentives of only around 9,000 crore rupees. Now, these are some of the very important points which have been given under this particular scheme. Apart from this, it is also very important for you to remember that USA, United States of America, went to WTO, World Trade Organization, filed a case against various export incentive schemes which are given by Government of India, such as MEIS, EPCG, export promotion of capital goods, etc. And WTO has ruled in favor of USA and has stated that within a specific period of time, Government of India should be withdrawing these particular export-linked incentive schemes. Hence, Government of India has announced a new scheme, RODTEP, Refund of Duties and Taxes on Export Products Scheme. But this particular scheme is yet to be implemented. As per Government of India, this particular scheme will be WTO compliant and will be much more higher in terms of coverage. That is, it will be much more exhaustive in terms of coverage compared to earlier schemes such as MEIS. Now, what is the meaning of this? Earlier, exporters were given incentives to offset some of the infrastructural issues that they were facing. But there were certain taxes or duties which were paid by the exporters but were not refunded under this particular scheme. For example, VAT that is paid on fuel that is used for transportation. This particular VAT that is paid was not refunded. The duty that is paid on consumption of electricity, even in this particular case, this was not refunded. So understand this. Though under earlier schemes, the Government of India provided incentives, there were certain taxes which were not refunded to the exporters. But as per the Government of India statement, all these particular duties or taxes which were earlier not given back or refunded earlier will be refunded under the concept of RODTEP. Now, what incentives will be provided, in what rates it will be provided, the Government of India is yet to bring out exhaustive guidelines related to this. You'll have to wait for it. But please understand, the Government of India stated that with introduction of RODTEP and exhaustive coverage of refund of these particular duties as well as taxes, the Government of India is moving towards the concept of zero rating of exports. Please make a note of this particular statement. I repeat it, it is very important. With introduction of RODTEP, Government of India has stated that it will be moving towards the concept of a zero rating of exports. So these are some of the very, very important points given in this particular article. Now, based on this particular discussion, let's take up a question here. Consider the following statements. Under MEIS scheme, all the notified commodities are provided with the same benefits. Wrong. The benefits varied. That is, the incentives which were given varied from one type of a item to another type of a commodity. Second, MEIS was launched in 2015, correct? It was part of FTP 2015-2020. Third, MEIS is notified by the Finance Ministry and implemented by the Ministry of Commerce. Wrong. It's a technical concept. To follow this, MEIS is notified by DGFT, Director General of Foreign Trade, and it is implemented by the Ministry of Commerce. So third statement is wrong. Right option will be option A. Only second statement is correct. Next article is related to the concept of the ease of doing business in India. Very recently, Government of India has taken various reforms or have taken various measures along with the states in order to promote more and more ease of doing business in India. On one side, because of the trade war between USA and China, more and more companies are shifting their manufacturing base out of China. As per one survey, very few of these particular companies which have moved out of China have actually entered into India. This particular article quotes that only 3 companies out of 56 companies have shifted their base from China to India. So on one side, when Government of India claims that India's ranking in ease of doing business report is improving, the reforms which are implemented at the central level as well as state level are making it very easy for these particular companies to do business in India. On the other hand, India has not been very successful in attracting these particular companies which have got rebased from China to other countries. What are the issues? This particular article discusses these particular issues. It basically makes a comparison between India and China. India, on one hand, enjoys a huge amount of factors which basically favor India's situation. For example, India has one of the highest consumption base, that is, the number of buyers or customer base is very, very high in India. India has a functional democracy, huge amount of human labor is available, etc. But on the other hand, some of the factors which support China are: one, in terms of labor, the reforms are implemented at the regional level based on the guidelines which are given at the center. In case of India, no doubt there is a functional democracy, but there are elections once every 5 years in India. And whenever there is a change in the government, let's say the new government is formed by another party with a different political ideology, there is a sudden change in the policies or the outlook of these particular policies. And when there's a sudden change in these kind of policies, it basically affects the investor confidence in the market. Or in simple terms, the foreign investors will be worried about these particular political outcomes which will affect their investments. Hence, it may also act as a negative factor in terms of India. Whereas in case of China, there is a single party rule. There is no opposition party to provide any kind of the opposition to the policies of this particular government. In addition to this, because of the political structure in China, the activism in the form of, let's say, opposition to land acquisition, opposition to construction of particular infrastructure is very, very less. This acts in favor, or this provides a certain impetus to these kind of infrastructure projects which are proposed as well as developed in this particular country. Apart from this, another very important factor which is working in favor of China is the model of SEZs, Special Economic Zones. In India, no doubt there are huge number of SEZs. As per various reports, there are more than 200 functional or operational SEZs in case of India. On the other hand, China has a very few number of SEZs, but these number of SEZs are very huge in terms of a capacity. In addition to this, the infrastructure support that is provided for all these particular industries in China is much, much superior compared to what it is there in case of India. As per this particular article, it states that the infrastructure is not just sufficient for the industries which are present today. This particular infrastructure can cater to even some of these particular industries which could be set up in the future. In addition to this, the universities in China have been oriented towards research and development as opposed to the situation in case of India. So these particular factors are favoring more and more establishment of these particular industries in China compared to India. In addition to this article also discusses, despite India's ranking improvement in ease of doing business report, in some of the parameters, even today, India's performance is very, very poor. For example, the concept of enforcement of contracts, the problem of land acquisition, although it is not part of specifically the ease of doing business report, I'm just generally saying what are the issues in case of India. The problem of skilled labor availability, the problem associated with corruption, etc. So these are some of the issues which have been noted in this particular article. So what has to be done by the government? What more needs to be done in order to attract more and more manufacturing as well as industries into India? Some of the recommendations which have been mentioned in this particular article are the ones which are given by Niti Aayog. These particular recommendations are: first, it has recommended that Government of India provide 10-year full tax exemption for those particular companies which are investing a minimum of $500 million in sectors such as medical devices, electronics, telecom equipment, and capital goods. Another recommendation is that it can give 4-year tax holiday to companies investing 100 million or more in labor-intensive sectors such as textiles, food processing, leather, and footwear. In addition to this, Niti Aayog also has recommended that these investors must be asked to pay a very low corporate tax rate of 10% for next 6 years. And apart from this, a single window center state clearance system should also be provided by the government in order to provide a easier clearance for these particular projects, or getting the licenses or clearances much easier for these particular projects. So these are some of the points which are discussed in this particular article. Based on this, I've given a descriptive question. Discuss the issues and reforms needed to promote manufacturing in India in 250 words. The next article is related to India's trade deficit with its trading partners. It's just a factual information which has been provided in this particular article. It is for the financial year 19 and 20, and as per this particular article, if you take the top 10 trading partners, India has a trade deficit with 9 of these particular 10 trading partners. India has a trade surplus only with USA. And with the rest of these particular 9 trading partners, at the end of the fiscal year 20, India has a trade deficit. Now, what do you mean by trade deficit? It simply means that the value of exports is lesser than the value of imports. Now, in addition to this, the article also has mentioned that India had a very marginal trade surplus with United Arab Emirates, UAE, and this particular marginal trade surplus has been wiped out, and this has become a trade deficit for the financial year 20. Now, in addition to this, it has also mentioned that in recent times, Government of India is thinking of reviewing the free trade agreements that it has signed with many of these particular trading partners. But if you take these particular 10 trading partners, India has an FTA, which is an operational FTA right now only with 3 countries. That is one with Singapore, another one with South Korea, and the third one is with Indonesia. So remember this, out of the top 10 trading partners, and when I say trading partners, I'm referring to bilateral trade. Out of these particular top 10 trading partners, India has a functional FTA only with these 3 countries, Singapore, South Korea, Indonesia. So in addition to this, article also mentions that if you take the trade deficit that India has with these particular 10 trading partners, it is somewhere in the range of around 70% of India's global trade deficit. So these are some of the very important factual pieces of information which has been provided in this particular article. Now, based on this, let me take up a couple of questions. Consider the following statements. India had a trade deficit with 9 of the top trading partners, that is bilateral trade, at the end of financial year 20, correct? India had a trade surplus with the US at the end of the financial year 20. Both are correct. Right option will be option C. Next question. With which of the following major trading partners does India have a free trading agreement? With USA? No, we do not have an FTA. We are negotiating a trade agreement with USA. China? No, we do not have it. With Singapore, South Korea, Indonesia. These are the 3 countries with which we have a functional and an operational free trade agreement. Right option will be option D, only 3, 4 and 5. So these are the various articles and the questions related to these particular articles for this particular time period. Thank you. Have a good day.